Okay, hello everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. Before we get started, we'd just like to quickly introduce ourselves. My name is Kono Fusco. I'm the media manager here at Therefore, and I'm joined on this call by my colleague Teresa.
Hi, everyone. I'm Teresa Tsvetkov, Content Marketing Editor here at Therefore Corporation. We're really happy to be bringing you this webinar today based on Therefore for the accounts payable process.
Okay, so before we get started, let's just clarify how you can ask questions during the webinar. So our Event Center platform has a Q&A function where you can type your questions directly. You can find this by clicking the Q&A button on the top right of your screen and typing your question in the text box below it. Once your question's been answered, the answer will appear right below it. And like always, we'll try to get to all of your questions during the webinar, but we'll also follow up with you by email if we don't get to your question. All right, I think we're ready to go now, so I'll hand over to Teresa.
All right, so before we get started, let's go over the agenda for this session. To keep our presentation really nice and focused, we've split the session into 4 different parts. So you can see here from our subway map, we're going to take 4 stops on the blue line before we reach the proverbial city center. We'll start off by looking at the AP process in general and explain the challenges and problems that are often coming up in this process. At the next step, we'll see about perfecting the process. So in this case, we'll examine the opportunities that lie behind an improved AP process and how to get there. Then we'll take a break from the slides and show you a real demo of a scenario where you can use Therefore for AP, recorded straight from our demo server. Then, finally, once we reach the end, we want to share a case study with you about a customer who's using Therefore in the finance department and the success they've had with it. So, on that note, Kono, can I ask you to give an introduction to the AP process?
Sure, I'll start this off. So, the accounts payable process is just a part of the entire operational workflow behind provisioning. And usually this process is called procure to pay, and it starts off with the creation of a purchase order. A good or service is requested from a supplier, and once this is received, it comes along with an invoice. This is where the accounts payable part actually starts, and in this case, we're referring specifically to processing received invoices. So this seems like a simple task, but it's actually the part of the process that has the potential to cause the most delays and hassles, both for the purchaser and the supplier, because this is where the money is actually changing hands. Now, the whole purchase to pay operation can be quite extensive, but today we want to focus specifically on the invoice processing part, which is an area where Therefore has great potential to improve the way the whole process is managed. So let's now focus our attention and look at the steps involved in the AP process specifically. We can see here that we've split this up into 6 steps that are required for invoice processing. Some of these could, of course, be grouped together. So for example, the receipt of the invoice is practically the same step as the data capture, but we've decided to split this so we can visually see what's happening to invoices at each stage of the process. So as I said, when an invoice is received, the data has to be captured in some format, whether the data is paper-based or electronic. And if an invoice has line items that need to be assigned to cost centers, it needs to be routed, of course, to the appropriate party. Then, of course, an invoice needs some kind of traceable approval before it can be paid. And finally, good record-keeping practices, and in some cases, legal obligations, call for you to archive the invoices for a certain period of time. So now that we've understood what the steps are and how they fit together, let's take a look then at some of the challenges that crop up in this process. So here we're looking at a visual representation of a typical workflow for invoice processing. Now, of course, each organization will have its own unique differences in how they go about this, but this is a pretty good general representation of how the process normally works. And in this case, we're assuming that this is a completely manual process with only basic elements of electronic data handling. So if we start off with the first step, where a purchase order is raised and an order is placed, at this point, we have to file the purchase order, since we'll need it later to reconcile with the invoice. We already see a potential for error here. If we don't have a safe and traceable way of filing these documents, they could get lost and result in delays and hassle down the line when it actually comes time to pay. All right, so now let's continue on a parallel path. Our order has arrived and we've received a proof of delivery. And again, just like with the purchase order, I have to file this for later reconciliation. And just like the PO, the POD could be misplaced or incorrectly filed, or who knows what, and that's what's going to cause trouble later on if that happens. All right, so now at this point, we get to the star of our little process here, which is our invoice. And this will likely arrive in paper form in a more traditional process. So now we get to the main part of it, which starts off by needing to reconcile the invoice with the original purchase order and the proof of delivery. And this is where we can run into a lot of issues with the manual process. So as we mentioned before, if something went wrong when filing the PO and POD, this is going to lead to some serious delays when the issue is discovered at this point. With a manual process, this step is also inherently slow because it requires the investment in time to pull the supporting documents from wherever they're stored, even if they were filed correctly. So after we've reconciled our invoice, it may need to be approved. In some organizations, this may be the case with high-value invoices, where these should be approved by a manager or higher up. This is another step, of course, that can cause quite a bit of hassle. The task may be forgotten by the approver, and you may have to chase them up personally if that's the case. You have no visibility at this point. You don't know, did the manager ever even view the document? Did they approve it and just forget to send it back? Was it even sent to the wrong person? Unfortunately, there's no easy way to check any of this. So at this point, once we have gotten the approval, assuming we do get it, we'll book the invoice and pay it. And the last step, as I mentioned earlier, is to archive the invoice that we have. Now, if you don't have a secure and efficient way of doing this, there is a high risk of losing or misfiling documents. And this may not be noticeable at first, but it could lead to some serious headaches if you ever get audited. And failure to comply with certain regulations could land you in hot water and result in fines or other penalties, all over something that's actually rather simple. And of course, we shouldn't forget that physical storage is expensive, both in terms of the space it takes up and the auxiliary costs of maintaining a physical archive. So now that we've seen some of the low-level details of possible trouble areas in the whole AP process, let's see exactly what kind of effects these challenges can have. So Teresa, would you mind telling us a bit more about that?
Yeah, sure thing. So according to research from the Aberdeen Group, 40% of finance departments polled stated that they need real-time data availability in the AP process, which, as we saw from our mock-up in the manual process, is quite difficult, if not impossible, to come by. 33% of departments experienced challenges in processing high volumes of invoices with their current staff levels. So we really see the need for process automation in this case, both to manage everyday processing as well as those seasonal fluctuations, like at the end of a reporting period, for instance. Finally, 29% of departments have difficulty locating and managing paper-based documents. And this tells us that there really is a great need and potential for digitizing these documents and storing them in an easily accessible, logical repository in order to avoid the hassles and costs that come with keeping paper documents. This is also a good way to avoid the risks inherent to managing paper, like poor or expensive security and risk of loss due to disasters or theft. Now that we've gotten a high-level overview of some of the common challenges in AP, let's drill down a little deeper and see the major issues that cause problems at each step of the process. And this is important to understand so that we can see how exactly an information management solution can help address the specific needs of each process area. Okay, so as we saw before, we've broken down the AP process into 6 steps. For the first step, where you want to receive the invoice, simply sorting invoices can become a massive chore. If you don't have an automated process in place for this, relying on a manual process makes this task very slow and also highly prone to error. When we get to the point where we're distributing the invoices, then, we also run the risk of loss and potentially significant delays. It's also difficult to deal with environments that have mixed types of invoices. An AP department, for instance, might receive invoices in multiple formats that need to be processed in different ways, or may receive the invoices at different locations, making it very difficult to coordinate in an efficient way before the process has really even gotten started. If we move on to the point where we need to capture the data on the invoice we've received, we'll start seeing some problems that can crop up there. So whenever you have manual data entry, you will always have some sort of inaccuracies. Not only that, but the labor-intensive nature of the process means that it's costing a lot more man-hours, and that could be better spent on more productive tasks. With this sort of process, you're also running the risk of some major compliant risks, as a lack of control when information is being manually processed can easily result in data breaches of the low-tech kind, something as simple as documents with confidential account info making its way out of the office in somebody's bag. And finally, error resolution can become a tedious task due to a lack of visibility and that time that's wasted while you're trying to track down the source of the error. If we take a look at cost allocation next, we can see that manual cost allocation has many of the same problems as other manual steps. The task is very repetitive and thus prone to error, and it's something that could very easily be automated in some way. So when this inevitably leads to the need for error resolution, we come across another set of issues. Not only does re-entering the data unnecessarily cost time and money, it also has a negative impact on cash flow. In the approval step, we come across some other problems. Finding documents in a manual process can quickly become cumbersome, as having to manually match invoices, purchase orders, and proof of delivery requires a lot of overhead in terms of the logistics of pulling all those documents and then returning them to their original storage locations. As you can imagine, this results in a lot of time wasted. Now, if during this step we discover that there are a lot of mismatched details or discrepancy among the documents that are being compared, we'll have to take a hit in productivity by retyping that data once again. And again, time and resources end up being wasted. At this point, we may also need to do some sort of manual routine for authorization. So you can see how something as simple as a clerical error can work its way down the line and cause delays to other problems. And as we mentioned earlier, with the manual process, it's really quite difficult to have visibility into this stage of the process. We may have lots of pending approvals and not know why they're being held up, and we don't know if it's a problem with the numbers, the budget, or even something as simple as the approver just being, out of the office for a few days. The lack of visibility at this stage can really grind everything to a halt. So let's finish off by looking then at the final two steps. In the payment stage, a manual AP process is likely to result in issues with payment processing, like paying a supplier twice due to the lack of visibility or long delays before the records are updated. This same lack of up-to-date information also means that you have no or only outdated information to work with when determining cash flow. You could just as likely have the opposite problem, though, if imperfections in the process cause you to make delayed payments. Now, the effects of this are obvious. Not only are you unnecessarily paying late fees, but you're also missing out on lucrative early payment discounts. And of course, all these issues affect your relationships with your suppliers. If your processes often result in some sort of issue or discrepancy, you'll spend a lot of time contacting or fielding questions from your suppliers, which not only costs you time, but could also jeopardize that future business with those suppliers. Now, once the process is completed and we've archived our documents, physical storage becomes an issue. So we can't just process our documents and forget about them. As we mentioned earlier, when we need to do that three-way matching to approve invoices, we waste a lot of time, and there's a lot of organizational overhead in pulling these documents and making sure they don't get lost somewhere along the way, and then refiling them. When it comes to storing documents securely, unless your office is like Fort Knox, you're always running some risks. It can get very complicated, tedious, and expensive to ensure physical documents are secure and trackable. Data breach or loss can easily result in audit failures and fines associated with it. And let's also not forget that you have some very real tangible costs associated with physical storage. All that paper storage takes up space, which you need to pay for, along with the associated infrastructure costs for managing it. Okay, so we've reviewed some of the common problems with the manual AP process, but we're not here to preach doom and gloom today. Instead, we want to tell you about how you can perfect this process and the positive effects this will have for your AP process, your finance department, and your organization as a whole. Okay, so Kono, do you mind giving us a quick introduction before we start with the demo?
Yes, of course. So when we talk about perfecting the process, we want to see how to make use of an information management solution to eliminate the problems we just saw and maximize our productivity. But before we dive into the details of how we're going to do that, we want to first give you some context about why we should do it and what the main goals of this initiative are. So if we take a look at the opportunity for perfecting AP processes, research from the Aberdeen Group has shown that organizations with automated AP can reap quite a few benefits. First of all, a huge one is a 49% savings in invoice processing costs. There's also 63% more of a chance for straight-through processing, which means that an invoice is processed following all the normal steps without any corrective action or rerouting due to errors or delays. An automated AP solution allows organizations to handle more than 4 times the amount of invoice volume than before. And finally, you can benefit by reducing your days payable outstanding by 18%. And this average comes out to be about 5.5 days shorter for organizations with automated AP. The results of a management survey show us the main goals of implementing an automated AP solution. 42% of respondents want, as a result of an improved process, to capture early payment discounts. This one makes a lot of sense because we're talking strictly in terms of, money that can be saved. And interesting to see is that 35% want to maintain good supply relationships and 31% are looking to improve this area. So we can see that another important element comes into play here, and that it's not just about money at any given time, but a lot of organizations are also thinking about the positive effects of good supplier relations on the entire process and their financial well-being in the long term. We also see that being able to manage large changes in invoice volume, like seasonal spikes at the end of the financial year, is a top priority for over 1/4 of respondents. So then, as a follow-up to that, I think it's important that we take a look at the various approaches taken by thought leaders to achieve the goals we just talked about. So if we take a look at another study by Aberdeen, we can see that a big need expressed by more than 50% of those surveyed is the integration of payables with the systems of other departments that they rely on, such as procurement and finance. A very close second is the investment in automation of invoice receipt and workflow, expressed by 46%. 39% have taken the approach to centralize invoice management processes, and 29% are looking to standardize these processes across different locations or business units. So now that we understand the background and context of automating AP processes, let's take a look specifically at how Therefore helps the AP process. So we know by now that we're using this 6-step process as an example in this case. We'll be looking at all of these steps in a demo of the Therefore software, which we're going to show you in a few minutes. And we've split the demo into 4 logical parts. We've got capture, process, integrate, and archive, in order to see all the features of Therefore in action. And we'll first just quickly explain the background of what we'll be doing in each part before we hop onto our demo server, so we can make sure that we're all on the same page. So, Teresa, if it's okay for you, can I ask you to cover the theory slide for each demo? I'll then take control of the demo server and run through the demo steps for each one.
Sure, no problem. So in that case, let me get started with the capture part. In the demo we're about to show you, we're going to be looking at capturing both paper and electronic documents. When we capture paper documents, we have the option to use OCR and barcode recognition to pick up data from the document and use that for automatic indexing. When we look at capturing electronic documents, what we're going to show you is an interesting use of the Therefore Universal Connector, which we'll use to get index data from third-party software. Another option, of course, would be to capture documents from a watch folder or mailbox and process them with the Therefore Content Connector. So Kono, could you go ahead and switch to the demo server now?
Yep, I've got it running already. Okay, so as Teresa said, we're going to be taking a look at two ways to get our data into Therefore. Let's first do it the more traditional way by scanning in a paper document. And now I don't have a scanner hooked up to this machine, so I'm just going to import the document I scanned in previously since it actually works the same way. All right, so there's my document. I can see it has a barcode, which we can read data from, or alternatively, we could have done it with OCR. So this document is automatically indexed, and let me show you that now. You can see that I've gotten all the index data I actually need from the document. All right, so let's save it, and this will have started off a workflow now in the Therefore Navigator. We will take a look at the next step soon, but while we're still in the capture phase, let me just show you another interesting way to save a document into Therefore. Like we mentioned earlier, we're going to do this using an integration with our universal connector. And for those of you who are not familiar with it, the Therefore Universal Connector is a great little tool for very light integration scenarios like the one we're about to see. And in this case, I'm going to show you how we take data from the accounting program Sage 1 and use it to save a document in Therefore. All right, so now that I've logged into our Sage 1 portal, let's say I want to enter a new invoice into the system. So let me first enter the supplier, then the dates, the invoice number, a reference, in this case our PO number, and then my line items. So, okay, at this point I have the data I need to enter in here. In this case, we want to save the document in Therefore to take advantage of all the document management capabilities of the system, but we don't want to enter this data twice. Well, that's where the universal connector comes in. So I've already got my profile set up, and all I have to do when I'm on this page is press a special hotkey. In this case, I chose Control, Alt, and F5, but you can set it to whatever combination you want. All right, so I now know it worked because it's prompting me to give it a document to save. So here's the document, okay, and there we go. So it pulled the data that I entered into Sage 1 and populated it into my index data dialog. So turns out that that was actually super easy. So let me just save here, and the document is already saved in Therefore. Of course, I want to save my data in Sage 1 as well. Okay, so we've gotten our invoice into Therefore, and now we can begin processing.
All right, so now that we've captured the data we need, let's see how we're going to process it. Well, the first thing we need to do is to match those documents. And in Therefore, we'll see how automatic document linking makes this really straightforward. Then we'll see how we can allocate cost centers and easily manage those approvals by using things like parallel work streams and exceptions. Then when we get to the approval stage, we'll look at some options for either automatic or manual approval, which can all be done automatically by the system based on conditions.
All right, so before we begin with this, let's take a quick look at our workflow. This is basically the process that we showed before, just optimized for a digital way of working. So we can see here we're at the first step, which is to check the invoice. This is where we're doing our document matching, and we can either approve using this path, or if something is wrong, we can send it for resolution. After that, the business logic behind the workflow takes over and intelligently routes the task based on any conditions we set. So, for example, we want the invoice routed to different departments for line item approvals based on cost centers. The workflow can do that in parallel, sending the invoice to any relevant departments while skipping those that are not affected. After it's been approved by everyone, we've set a rule that if the invoice is over a certain amount, it should need manual approval from management. And if the invoice is over this amount, the workflow will automatically choose that path. The invoice will then either be rejected or approved, and then we move on to the final task, which is to book and pay the invoice. So let's see what this looks like in action. If we check our workflow inbox, we'll open up one of the invoices we saved. So let's first take a look here at our instructions. Okay, we have a couple things. Let's do one thing at a time. So first thing is set cost centers. All right, so let me take a look at my index data and do that first. Our prints are going to be for the marketing department, while the printer is the IT department's responsibility. All right, so that's done. Let me just check that off. And the next thing I need to do is to check the invoice against the PO and POD. Okay, piece of cake. So if you look here, you'll see that it has the relevant PO and POD already linked to the document. We had saved these documents prior to starting the demo, but they were automatically linked by the PO number once we saved the invoice, as we did a few minutes ago. So that means that we don't have to go looking for these documents. I can just view them right here. So let's see, that's my POD. That looks good. And there's my purchase order. Okay, fine. That all seems to be in order. So that means I can move on with the workflow and say, okay, this is a match. Let's send it off to the cost centers. Good, so let's check back with our workflow now. All right, so we can see that since we had cost centers for marketing and IT, the workflow split here and is now awaiting approval. Let me just do that real quick for them and approve it so we can move on with the workflow. All right, so let me refresh. Let's look again. We can see that after our cost center approved their line items, the workflow arrived at the final approval stage, but bypassed the manual approval since I guess it must have been below our manual approval threshold. So that means that the invoice was automatically approved, and now we've reached the final step where we have to pay and book the invoice. So before I show you that, we're going to flip back to the presentation to explain how we're going to do this.
Okay, so once we've reached the pay stage, this is where it gets really interesting with therefore being able to support different types of integration scenarios. In a scenario where a light integration is needed, like for pulling up documents based on data in third-party applications, the Therefore Universal connector works really well by giving you a chance to pull that data from almost any third-party application like QuickBooks, Sage, Quicken, or really any program both installed and hosted that lets you read and copy data. This is what we'll be focusing on in this part of the demo. However, Therefore also offers connectors to SAP and Dynamics NAV, which allow a really deep level of integration and a truly seamless experience working with both systems. Although these connectors won't be shown in detail in our demo today, we do encourage you to check out our YouTube channel, Therefore TV, for videos showing how these connectors work and the use cases they support. In any case, let's take a look at the light integration scenario with the Therefore Universal connector.
Okay, good explanation. Now let me show you what this looks like in real life. So Teresa mentioned that the Universal connector can pull data from almost any third-party application. We're going to stick with Sage 1 in this case to round out the story, so let me show you what we mean. We've processed our workflow now, and we're at the stage where we have to pay. Well, we can do this using Sage 1 or another program, but we may at this point want to review the invoice or any related documents before paying. Although the invoice is in Therefore, you don't have to go opening Therefore specifically to go look for it. We can take a shortcut by using the Universal connector in this case. So let's say that we're about to pay this invoice, but we need to take another look at the original. So I'm in Sage 1, ready to go, and all I need to do is highlight a certain value, a unique reference like the invoice number, and press the hotkey I set up. So here we go. It automatically pulls up the relevant document in Therefore. I can review this document, and like we saw before, we can also easily view related linked documents like the PO or the POD. So using the Universal connector, we can see that it's possible to interact with both systems both ways and use the data we pull from the third-party application to both save and retrieve information in Therefore. Okay, so we looked at the whole processing cycle in therefore, but as we know, that's not the end of a document's life cycle. We still need to hold on to it well beyond the time it's done processing. And for that, we need to see the long-term storage capabilities of the system.
All right, so let's take a look now at the archive part. We know that Therefore has a great repository with all the tools you need to keep your documents secure even after processing. And we want to draw your attention in particular to Therefore's robust retention policies, which allow you to migrate your data to primary and backup storage and to secure your documents for the legally required time period. This is all automated without any user intervention, and it really helps you by maintaining complete records in case of any audit. Access permissions are another way Therefore excels. There are completely customizable permission settings which allow you to restrict access to documents so that they can only be viewed by authorized personnel. And of course, you can also log and track actions performed on all documents in the system should you need to do so. For this, we're going to show you a quick example of what these two tools look like in Therefore.
Right, so let me show you briefly how this is done in Therefore. Now, this is getting a little more technical here, but I know there's a lot of technicians watching this presentation too, so I'll give you a quick rundown. So first we talked about retention policies, which help you keep track of your documents and make sure they're not deleted before a certain period of time. If I open the Therefore Solution Designer, which is our administrative program, I'll go down to the storage section and take a look at my retention policies. I already created a policy here called AP Documentation 7 years. So let's see how I set this up. I said I want to delete old documents, and then I chose 84 months, which is 7 years. Of course, you can change this to whatever time period you want. We can choose how to measure these 84 months as well. In this case, I chose the simplest option, which starts the clock at the date of the creation of the document. But you can also choose to have the date of last modification, or you can base it on some kind of date field in the index data, which gives you full flexibility in determining how and when documents are deleted. When it comes to access permissions, Therefore has a really easy way of doing this. If I check out the categories that we were using in this demo, I can view the security by just simply right-clicking and selecting security. Here I have some basic permissions set up, with admins having full access and regular users having only read and write permissions. Now, of course, I can break this down further, like if I want a specific user to have special rights. If I click the advanced permissions here, I can see all sorts of specific permissions, which I can individually allow or deny, giving me full flexibility in deciding who can access parts of the system and what they can do. Since the permission structure is hierarchical, I can make it easier to assign similar permissions by going to the next highest level. So for example, if I assign these permissions on the folder, they'll be inherited by all the categories below, so I don't have to do it individually. All right, well, that is the end of our demo for today. We just have one more short topic we want to talk about before the end of the session. So now we've basically seen the impetus for change, and we also looked at how to bring this about using Therefore. So let's quickly recap by going over the benefits of an automated AP process. The obvious one here is the reduced costs. You can decrease the cost of invoice processing as a whole, decrease or eliminate late payment penalties, and take advantage of early payment discounts. All of this adds up to significant savings at the end of the year. Another benefit is the increase in efficiency and productivity that you get by automating data entry and decreasing human error. This also leads to faster cycle times and a higher ability to manage large changes in invoice volumes. On top of that, we also get benefits to how you control your information and comply with regulatory standards. An automated solution gives you clear visibility into the process and helps you maintain good supplier relations. And the very nature of a secure digital repository means that you can maintain sound records for compliance purposes. And now finally, an automated solution like Therefore gives you a massive benefit in terms of your document archive. Digital storage is very secure, and you can easily control access to prevent unauthorized viewing or tampering of data. Documents can't be misplaced or lost, since backup copies are automatically retained, even in the event of primary data loss.
All right, so now we've reached the end of the session, and we want to take a few more minutes to show you a success story of a customer using Therefore in AP with pretty much exactly the same scenario we talked about today. The customer is called Macabre BK. They're based in India, and they're a civil engineering and construction company with a long history in providing materials handling systems to industry. With the help of our colleagues at Canon India, they now use Therefore in their finance department to manage invoices and workflows. So I'll go ahead and play this case study video now so that you can hear all the details for yourself.
Looks familiar. Have documents got you in a bind? Don't you wish managing documents could be easier? It can be with Therefore. Therefore Information Management Solution can help organizations all around the world work smarter by offering a way to improve the storage, management and processing of information.
Implementation of Therefore in the finance department has been very successful.
It's very nice. I find it to be quite useful.
Canon implemented Therefore in Macabre BK, a 96-year-old civil engineering and construction company with annual revenues of more than 800 crore. Macabre BK's finance department had a difficult time tracking and processing the large volume of invoices.
We are engaged in the EPC business where a lot of invoices are sent to the customers, and since they are long projects, long duration projects, 2 to 3 years, and final payments comes after when the plants are commissioned and handed over to the customer. At that point of time, complete reconciliation is required of the invoices raised. So we are required to keep track of those invoices, and earlier it used to be a pain actually.
Tracking of invoices aside, Macabre BK also struggled with physical storage of documents. Retrieval of documents was also cumbersome. Their search for an efficient solution led them to Canon.
Well, I think Canon is quite experienced as far as workflow management for a project company like us is concerned, and I think Canon, they've done a brilliant implementation here.
Canon's team was well equipped for the change management process. They worked to train the Macabre BK team to benefit from the best features of Therefore. For example, with Therefore's capture feature, documents are easy to scan, upload, digitize. It also makes indexing, archiving and classifying easier. The navigator and viewer makes finding and editing documents a breeze. There are several other benefits of implementing a system such as Therefore: enhanced security of documents, automated workflow, and saving on valuable office space. Macabre BK's finance team was delighted with the way invoice processing workflows were made simpler after Therefore implementation. It effectively automated and managed how information was routed through the organization.
Post this implementation, what we saw is that there was a major reduction in terms of man hours spent by employees and simplicity of workflow and approval process.